Hello and welcome to the Bitcoinlens podcast. Today's episode 16, and today I'm going to cover a Bitcoin update as well as the final US election update. We're getting into that kind of sizzling period right now. Like in 2 days we got the election and a lot of the early voting is in already, but things are definitely heating up, so I definitely wanted to cover this one more time before we just go back to the default Bitcoin updates. But having said that, let's jump right into it and start over some of the Bitcoin things I observed this week. So first of all, I mentioned last week Microsoft, they're going to have a shareholder meeting in December, letting their shareholders vote on whether they need to add Bitcoin within their portfolio. So the early voting has actually started on that now for Microsoft. So shareholders are actually now able to vote on whether they think Microsoft should add Bitcoin to their strategy there. So that was interesting to see, and yeah, let's hope that turns out positive. We all know how massive Microsoft is. I believe 3 trillion market cap. So, if we get an ultimate yay on that one, that's going to be pretty big for the market and pretty big for price action. Next up, US Bitcoin ETFs now hold over 1 million Bitcoin. So as of this week, so BlackRock, they kept on buying a ton this week. They're over 420,000 Bitcoin now, almost 430,000. Grayscale, obviously they've been in now for a while. They've got 250,000 Bitcoin, and then Fidelity over in third place, 188,000 Bitcoin. These companies are really owning a lot of percentage of Bitcoin, guys. Like, out of this big pie, their percentages are really climbing, up closer to 0.5% here of the total Bitcoin supply. Moving on to MicroStrategy. So MicroStrategy this week, they announced a 42 billion capital raising plan using 21 billion through ATM. So ATM is at the market offering. And so basically they did this capital raising plan using 21 billion through an ATM, and basically an aim of 21 billion from a fixed income instrument. So if you're not familiar with at the market offering, it's basically just a company can offer the secondary public shares on pretty much. It usually happens after the IPO, but just depending on what that market price is and when they want to do it. But yeah, it's just the at the market offering which they can do to issue, and basically this allows them to raise some capital. So obviously that's kind of been their strategy. They're selling off their debt and then buying more Bitcoin. And that's pretty much been their strategy since 2020 there with Michael Saylor. MicroStrategy now owns 252,000 Bitcoin, worth roughly 17 billion, depending on what day this week you looked at. So just to give you an idea, MicroStrategy has more Bitcoin than all of Grayscale. That is pretty eye-opening when you look at it that way. Strive Asset Management, just to kind of move on here. Strive Asset Management, this is Vivek Ramaswamy's asset management company, and they are now actually getting involved in Bitcoin. This is a $1.7 billion assets under management company, and they announced this week that they plan to make Bitcoin a foundational element, in standard investment portfolios for some of their investors. So some promising news there. Their CEO, Matt Cole of Strive, he said, I quote, unquote, our focus on offering clients true financial freedom through the thoughtful integration of Bitcoin. It differentiates our wealth management business from nearly all major competitors today. So nice to see a nice little $1.7 billion assets under management asset company there, basically looking into Bitcoin as well. Moving on to Van Eck, the Van Eck CEO predicts, he made a little prediction of Bitcoin's future. I thought this was a pretty interesting one. He said he's predicting that Bitcoin will be used in global trade as well as held as a reserve asset by most global central banks. And he said he predicts we'll have at least a 2% allocation by most of these global central banks by 2050. And if that, assuming that's accurate, that'll put the price of Bitcoin at roughly $3 million per Bitcoin. Now you may tell yourself, oh, that's a crazy prediction. How can you have $3 million Bitcoin? Keep in mind, this is 26 years away from now. And assuming that prediction is accurate, that's only a 16% compounding annual growth rate of return there. So it's actually pretty conservative if you ask me. Now, moving on to some of the technology things I've seen this week, looking at iPhone users can now send Bitcoin directly from lock screen, and this is from iOS 18. Just to give you an idea how significant that is, some of you may say, "Oh, well, that's iPhone, right? No one's going to use iPhone for payment." Well, that's actually not accurate. So Apple Pay has already 62 million users. Most of that's in the US. And Apple Pay accounts for 92% of all mobile wallet transactions in the United States for debit cards. And it's 86%. It accounts for 86% of the credit card transactions via Apple Pay. Over 85% of US retailers now accept Apple Pay. So adding that little Bitcoin there, easy method there on iPhone, this is just going to simplify access to Bitcoin. And honestly, guys, you look at this logically, that this is one of the biggest reasons most people are not in Bitcoin. It's not because they don't want to be in Bitcoin, it's just the access, and that initial access is a little intimidating. So great work there by Apple, allowing users now via iOS 18 to actually pay via Bitcoin. Moving on to BRICS. So I know I mentioned last week's episode the BRICS new banknote. That was pretty interesting information and nice new exciting information there with global trade. But I also saw this week that they announced that they're now some of these countries in BRICS, UAE, Argentina, Ethiopia, they are now using government resources to mine Bitcoin. So Russia's sovereign wealth fund is also investing in Bitcoin mining throughout BRICS countries, and this is basically with the goal of settling global trade in Bitcoin. So once again, they feel a little bullied, right? We've seen that over the last few years. They feel a little bullied by the US. What are they going to do? They're going to jump ship and they're going to start settling trade in different mediums. And this is really promising for the Bitcoin community, and I would say for the BRICS nations, that they're going to now start settling trade in Bitcoin. So, just the interesting world statistic I saw this week, and I know I talk a lot about Nayib Bukele of El Salvador, and his whole Bitcoin model, buying one Bitcoin a day. But I saw he now holds, as a global president, he now holds the highest approval rating of any world leader at almost 90%. His approval rating is 89%, which is absolutely insane. Like, I mean, I can't remember seeing a president having an approval rating over 54, 55%. So this is really, really mind blowing to see that someone can get this high of an approval rating. So thought I really wanted to mention that. And, one of their allies there in Latin America, Argentina, the Central Bank of Argentina this week, they hosted a live Bitcoin mining exhibit. It was a couple of days ago. And this is the first, this Central Bank of Argentina is the first central bank to feature crypto mining equipment in an exhibition. So the exhibition reflected potential shift in the central bank's stance toward digital assets and basically their integration into some of these financial systems. Now, something that was kind of interesting for me there is they featured their crypto mining rigs, and also had some symbolic money balls. And this was made from shredded currency. So that was a cool exhibit there by the Central Bank of Argentina, and it looks like Nayib Bukele is really orange pill Javier Milei over there. So really good to see this, and Argentina is definitely on the right track. With I saw inflation is also now on a month-to-month basis. He cut that down from, I think when he took office, it was over 60% or something month by month, and now it's like in the single digits. So really exciting news there from Javier Milei in Argentina. The government of Bhutan is approaching 1 billion in Bitcoin holdings. So we established just a few weeks ago that they actually hold more than El Salvador. So pretty crazy news there. They're still buying. They still keep buying, and I see every week they're purchasing more. But great stuff there from Bhutan, like getting over they're almost at the $1 billion mark in Bitcoin holdings, which is insane. Moving on to the U.S. election, since that is pretty relevant this week, and we got 2 days before the election, and it's gonna be wild. It may get a little ugly, but I think ultimately, as a Bitcoiner, you're optimistic for the election, and we all know who's going to be the better option for Bitcoin. But having said that, Bitcoin doesn't rely on who the president is or what the world leaders are. It could get expedited faster. The price action could be expedited faster. The adoption could be expedited faster, which is obviously huge. But the fact is, Bitcoin, with the correct president, without the correct president, is still by far the best asset you could own right now. And, a tremendous hedge against inflation. So just some of the stats that I've looked at here, just because it's kind of game time decision time right now. So we got to make some final decisions here. I looked at some of the stats. U.S. job market kind of deteriorating further. So the permanent job losers jumped to 1.84 million in October. This is the most since 2021. Now, guys, remember this is coming off the tail end of COVID in 2021, and we're getting at those levels right now. So the number now has risen for 19 straight months, the longest streak since 2008. And we all know what happened in 2008, end of 2008. We had the recession. So just more little key indicators, looking at all the different patterns, and just one of those things that keep telling me that we may see a financial crisis coming up unless we see some drastic change in leadership. JP Morgan, they came out this week and they says a Trump win could boost Bitcoin's price. And they obviously see. I kind of see. You look at the betting markets. There's a very close correlation with the betting markets and the Trump's likelihood for winning and the Bitcoin price. So there's actually a super strong correlation between the betting markets and Trump's chances for winning. So like I feel like the better he's doing in the polls, the better he's doing in the betting markets. You can almost see a direct correlation. So as you can see, I think Kamala has actually she's well, according to polls, which I absolutely don't believe polls, regardless of who's winning the polls. You can definitely see, like, in the polls, like, she's been doing a little bit better here in the last few days, and you can see Bitcoin dropped about 3-4K. So super interesting to see that. And you know nice prediction there from JP Morgan. I tend to agree. And it's honestly not even about me agreeing. It's just look at the financial markets and look when there's any optimistic news of Trump possibly winning. You can see there's a direct correlation. The S&P 500, Nasdaq, pretty much the whole stock market, and Bitcoin. So another key indicator here that I looked at is U.S. job openings. It fell by 420,000 in September to 7.44 million. So that was kind of interesting. I saw Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, if you're not familiar with her, she came out and said the banking system is becoming a huge problem. So we saw the unrealized losses from banking exceeding 515 billion now from U.S. banks. So once again, I hope for the best, but you definitely got to plan for the worst. And right now, if you got your Secretary of Treasury even speaking like that, then we possibly have a problem here. So the Mara CEO, Marathon Digital Solutions, Fred Thiel, I quote, he said the U.S. must ensure that they have a large amount of Bitcoin such that they can potentially either protect themselves in the event there's a huge movement off the dollar, which we discussed in previous podcasts, just so that they can still trade, but also so they can project power using Bitcoin. That's a quote from Fred Thiel, Mara CEO. So Marathon Digital Solutions, Mara is a digital assets technology company, and they engage in mining, cryptocurrencies, and essentially focus on the blockchain ecosystem and generation of digital assets. But the point I'm trying to make here, how this ties in with crypto and how this ties in with Bitcoin. That's exactly what Loomis, RFK, Trump proposed at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville in July. So, for me, when I read this and, I totally agree with Fred Thiel here. That to me firmly aligns with Trump right now. That's the only guy I'm seeing right now talk about strategic reserves. And it would, even if we don't do a strategic reserve for right now, I would just be so happy if we just stop selling the Bitcoin that we've seized from criminal activity. That would be a great start, right? That's hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin we've sold off for superior or inferior paper money. So interesting quote there from him. On the mortgage rates, you may ask yourself how the mortgage rates doing, especially if you're a foreign listener or foreign watcher here. Home buyers in the U.S. can now expect an average interest rate of 7.23. I think it jumped by about 8 basis points this week. So it's up sharply from about 6.7% just 1 month ago. So the average mortgage rate 7.23. It's absolute chaos out there, guys. Like, I mean, no one's buying houses right now. It's absolute carnage. Like, I remember we bought our last house like 5 years ago, 5, 6 years ago. And this was under 4% interest rate, 3, 4% interest rate. So you almost got almost half the interest rate we're looking at right now. So in Q3 2024, the median US house sold for $420,000, which basically means if you had a mortgage with 20% down payment there, you would have roughly a $2,300, $2,400 payment per month, like a monthly payment there. And that's not including taxes and insurance. You add those little things with, and you're looking at $3,000. And that's not adding maintenance. So we can go down that rabbit hole as far as you want, but it's not looking good right now if you're a home buyer. And honestly, if I had to give advice to anyone right now, I'm not a financial advisor, but if I had to give someone advice, I would say just don't worry about buying right now. Just rent a house, buy Bitcoin, and guess what? Bitcoin, everything in terms of Bitcoin is getting cheaper every year. Wait it out 2, 3 years, you can buy a house for less than a Bitcoin easily. So that would be my advice. And finally, US banks are now currently sitting at $750 billion in real estate losses and real estate debt. That is 7 times larger than it was in 2008 when we had the housing bubble and the recession. So I just kind of wanted to end it off on that. Obviously, there's way more to electing a president than just that. But for me, those are key ones of the economy, Bitcoin, the financial system, and all those things are important. And obviously, it's not isolated. If these things are doing well, I feel like everything else around it takes care of itself. So those are kind of key things for me. But that is pretty much my update for this week. Hopefully that was insightful. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and rate if you're on Apple Podcast. And I look forward to talk to you all next week. Have a great week.